Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Today I want to talk about books and money. I have seen a couple of people do videos like this a while back. Mari from My Name is Marinez did a video. Happy Little Books did a video like this back in January, but it's not something we do very often. Not that many people are talking hard numbers in terms of budgets and how much we're spending on books and subscription services. How many of the books that we're buying are we actually reading? And here's the thing, anytime we talk about money or purchasing habits, it can be very sensitive because it's a complicated thing. So I want to say a few things to sort of set the stage for the video I'm going to do and the things I'm going to talk about. And, you know, being me, of course, I'm going to give you stats and charts because I love doing stuff like that. I want to be a little bit transparent with everybody. So one thing that is worth talking about is I am 35. I'm in a pretty stable financial situation. I have more income available to me to spend on things like books. Additionally, this is my full-time job. I work full-time hours making content on the internet about books, and on top of that, I've been reading around 400 books a year. So with those two things put together, I'm probably more comfortable having a higher level of expense on a monthly basis because it is for my job, because I am reading as much as I do, than a lot of people would. So I kind of want to set that as a basis. A couple other things that always come up when this cyclical conversation comes around about book buying and reading is the difference between being a reader as a hobby and being a collector as a hobby, because while there can be some overlap, in other ways those are two different things. There are people who are purely just readers. They're not really interested in the physical object of the book as, say, an art piece, versus collectors are. I'm a little bit of both. I don't do a ton of collecting, but I do some, and so some of this is collecting specific editions of books, and so that's going to influence the way that I spend money. I guess the other thing worth saying, and again, this is where things get complicated, is on the one hand, I do recognize that I'm in a place of privilege in terms of being older, being in a more financially stable place in my life, which is certainly not where I have always been, not how I grew up, not how I was earlier in my life at all. And so that has allowed me to purchase more books, but also that living in the United States, I have more access than people in some places have. So all of those things sort of factor in. And then we have this added layer that for me, because I'm financially able to do so, sometimes I'm purchasing books because I want to support authors, especially authors from marginalized communities, because I want them to get paid for their work. I want them to be able to continue writing. And sometimes those might be books that I'll read and not necessarily keep in my collection. I read so many books that I don't actually keep a lot of the things that I read unless they're favorites or unless I have another use for them. I might resell them to my local indie bookstore or pass them along to other people. But I do feel like it's valuable to use some of the money I have available to support authors from marginalized communities in my purchases. Some of the books I do are directly work-related expenses for read-alongs I'm doing or different projects. And then finally, when we're talking about acquisition of books, because I do this as my job full time, we're also talking about books that are sent to me from publishers, from authors, from PR companies, some that I've been asked about, some that are sent unsolicited. There's kind of a wide range of things. So as I'm filming this, we're at the end of July, we're a little more than halfway through the year, and for the first time this year in my spreadsheet, I've actually been tracking all of the physical books that have come in throughout the year, whether I've read them, who they're from, whether I bought them myself, where I bought them from, if they came from a publisher. That's not something that I had tracked previously. This is the first year that I've done it. And then in preparation for making this, I also went back and rewatched Mari's video, and she was also talking about digital purchases, so ebooks and audiobooks and subscriptions, and it made me realize I had not been tracking those things, but because they're all digital, I had access to that information. So did I spend hours creating a new spreadsheet for all of my digital purchases, even though it was like really painful to see how much money I've dropped on audiobooks? And yes, I did. So I do have that information as well. And I think it's probably good for me to be aware of this information because I'm definitely spending more money than I think I'm spending, especially on audiobooks. I don't buy a lot of ebooks, as you'll see, and I have been keeping track of my spending with my physical books, but the audio does end up being a lot because I am a sucker for a deal. Anyway, so we're gonna get into some of my data, talk a little bit about my thoughts on it, what it means, and maybe what I want to do with it moving forward. And I also hope that being transparent about this will be helpful in some ways so that people watching who are maybe in BookTube can get a handle on like what maybe is typical or atypical. And I don't think that I'm necessarily like a good average example of this, but this will kind of give you guys some ideas. I'll be honest, I'm like a little bit nervous about doing this because I didn't realize how much I was spending some of the time, but I do think it's valuable information and it's worth talking about. So I have lots of stats and charts. So a lot of what we're going to talk about here is my physical books because I did a bunch of stats on the physical books that I had before I went and made a spreadsheet of all of my digital items, but we'll kind of talk about the variation. And I do want to note that I have 1 month in purchases that is a big outlier month, and that is the month of my birthday. And part of the reason that the number for that month is so high is that I was sent money for my birthday that I used to buy more books than I typically would. So if you're like, oh my God, how you spent a lot of money that month? I did, but that's why. Okay, so talking physical books, this spreadsheet includes all the physical books that I've acquired, whether through purchases or whether through being sent to me. This does include ARCs, which aren't technically like something you spend money on, but they are included in the entire number of books added to my physical TBR. One thing that I'm not adding here is books that I'd been sent unsolicited that I'm not interested in reading and have already passed along. Occasionally that does happen where I'll get a book in the mail and I'll be like, I'm just not that interested. And so that would not show up on this list, just to kind of set the parameters. And I also want to note that even though these numbers might seem high, I'm actually doing a lot better this year than I did last year. Part of the reason I decided to start tracking this in such detail is that my acquisitions had gotten a little bit out of control and my TBR, my physical TBR, was growing a lot faster than I was reading it down, even with how much I read. And this year that has not been the case. It's stayed pretty steady. So I'm not necessarily reading it down, but it's also not growing a lot either. So, okay, it's a lot of setup, but this is gonna be a long video. Hopefully it's interesting. So in total, as of late July, when I did all of this data, I have acquired 175 physical books. So in 7 months, since January 2022, I've acquired 175 physical books. If you are curious how many books I have read so far in 2022, it's like 236. Now, not all of those are physical books. A lot of them might be ebooks or audiobooks, but to just give you a sense of books coming in versus books that I'm actually reading, that seems like a pretty reasonable number to me. Of those 175, I purchased 97 of them, and 78 of them were either gifts or books that were sent to me from publishers. Not quite even, but pretty close. I've purchased a little bit more than what's been sent to me. The overall average price per book was $6.46, but if I look just at the books that I purchased myself, the average price per book was $11.65. That was the average of the books that I was actually buying. The median price per book of the books that I bought was $13.49. So on average, I'm spending $12 to $13 for a physical book. But there is definitely variation. The least I spent on a book was $1.08, and the most that I spent on a book was $29. The big question here is, okay, you bought all those books. Have you been reading them? Because I have been keeping track of which books that I've read. Have I been reading them? So taking a look at the overall number of books, the total 175, including books sent to me and books that I purchased, I have read 81 of them, and I've DNF'd 5. So I have either read or DNF'd 49% of the books that have come onto my shelves, which isn't terrible. It's not great. I would like that number to be higher, but I have either read or unhauled through DNFing about half of them. Now, what's a little bit interesting is if I take a look at how many of the books that I myself purchased, the number is a little bit lower. And I think what this tells me is that I feel more pressure to read books that were sent to me for review from publishers than I do to read books that I buy for myself. It's not dramatically lower, but it is lower. So of the 97 books that I purchased this year, I have read 40 of them and DNF'd 2 of them, which means I've either read or DNF'd 43% of the books that I purchased for myself. Not terrible numbers, not great numbers either. What this tells me is that I'm probably purchasing more books than I should be, that it is something that I should be cutting back on. And my guess is that a lot of the books that are sort of messing with those numbers are books that I'm getting on sale. And so even though I like a sale, I like a deal, maybe sometimes I don't need to actually take it. So overall, in terms of physical books, I paid for 48.6% of them, so not quite half, but almost half. And the average dollar amount that I've been spending per month on physical books is $161.37. So like $160 a month. Is that a lot? Is that a lot? Now keep in mind, this is not including digital purchases. So we're going to add that in when we start talking about, when we start talking month by month. That is, it's kind of a lot. It is more than I would like to be spending on average. But again, because this is my job, if we were throwing the digital stuff into the mix, I would probably be pretty comfortable on average with my spending being around $150 if it was physical and digital, because they are business expenses for me. If I could make it lower, that's great, but I probably do have a larger budget I'm comfortable with than a lot of people might. Now, if you're curious about the range of spending on physical books, the month that I spent the least was June, where I spent about $58, and the month that I spent the most was May, where I spent $303 plus money spent on a box that I had originally put in July, because this is based on when books arrive, not when I spend the money. But if I move the spending for this book box that I bought for my birthday into May and change it, then May actually would go up to like $420. So it's a big outlier. Like on average, I'm not spending nearly that much. But again, I was sent money for my birthday. I splurged a lot more than I normally would that month, though admitting that it was like $400. That's a lot. I mean, granted, it's not like I was doing a lot of other super expensive things, but yeah, I spent a lot on books in my birthday month. Now, if we add on the digital, which is like ebooks and audiobooks and everything, I was spending an average of $70.47 per month, although that doesn't include my Kindle Unlimited subscription, which I'm thinking of canceling because I'm not sure it's really worth it for me. I do use it a little bit, but I'm not sure I think it would be cheaper for me to just buy the ebooks. But if I tack on the Kindle Unlimited subscription, which is $9.99 a month, that will push it up to $80.46 a month on audiobooks and ebooks. This includes Kindle Unlimited, it includes ebooks, not that I buy that many ebooks, but occasionally I do. This also includes audiobooks that I get from Audible, Libra FM, and Chirp. So an average of about $80 a month on digital. So if I add that all together, this year, on average, I have been spending $242 a month on books. Physical books, audiobooks, ebooks. This is probably why I wasn't tracking my audiobook purchases, honestly, because I didn't really want to see the number. That's a lot. Yeah, that is a lot. That is more than I want to be spending. Ooh, it's a little painful. And I think what's worse is that with the audiobooks, I am less likely to have actually read all of them. Sometimes Audible does these deals where they're like, oh, all of these audiobooks are like $5, and I'll snap up a bunch of them. And then do I read them all? No. Like, some of them I will, some of them I'll listen to, and others are just sitting there and I forget about them because they're digital. As opposed to when I use a credit to buy an audiobook, I am much more likely to have read it because it's usually something that I'm reading more immediately. So I think what I'm taking away from this is that I need to be much more cautious with those Audible sales where they seem like a good deal, but if it's not something that I'm gonna be reading soon, I don't need to be getting the audiobook. I can just go and get it another way later on when I'm actually going to read it. I think the exception to this is when I'm collecting the audiobooks for series I know that I have plans to read. For instance, I have been trying to get all of the Robin Hobb audiobooks on sale when I can get them for $4 or $5 because they're long fantasy books that I know I'm going to read. They're very expensive full price, and that is worth it for me. Yeah, so that's a little bit of a different scenario, but I was a little bit taken aback by how much I've been spending overall. And knowing that I've been doing a better job this year than I did last year, oh God. So I think what I'm gonna do is for the rest of the year, I'm gonna be tracking my physical and audio purchases, and I wanna see these numbers drop. I basically would like to be spending closer to an average of $150 a month total, including digital purchases, rather than like $240. That's more than I want to be spending. So I'm going to be working on finding ways to cut back. One thing I am planning on doing after I'm done filming is canceling my Kindle Unlimited subscription because it's $10 a month, but I don't use it frequently enough for it to really be worth it. I could just buy the ebooks. I just don't read that many ebooks and I don't think it's worth it for me. So that'll be one thing. But I'm gonna track it and I'll check back in January and we'll see if I've been able to cut back to a level that feels more reasonable for me. Now, money stuff aside, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that sometimes I do spend money to support marginalized authors. And so I want to take a look at some of the stats. And I didn't do this for my audiobooks and ebooks, but for my physical books, I took a look at what were the kinds of books I was buying, what were the age groups, what were the genres, and then on top of that, what were the identities of the authors that I was purchasing from and books that were being sent to me for review, because I think it's interesting to look at both of those pieces. So let's start with the age category. If I look at all of the books that have come in, this includes books I've purchased, gifts, and pre-orders. About 81% of them are for an adult audience and almost 14% are for a YA audience. This kind of mirrors the way my reading has been going this year, so that's not super surprising. Then if I zoom in just to my personal purchases, books I've bought for myself, the numbers look pretty similar. A little more than 82% of the books I purchased are for an adult audience, and again, almost 14% are for a YA audience. There's also a little bit of middle grade. And in terms of genre, if I take a look at all of the books, about 36% of them are fantasy, and then about 22% are romance, and 16.5% are sci-fi. Zooming into the books that I purchased, almost 40% of the books that I purchased are fantasy, so I am heavily purchasing fantasy. 15.5% are sci-fi, and 15.5% are romance. One thing that I did find really interesting is I have not purchased very much historical romance at all, which tells me that most of the historical romance I'm reading, I'm getting for review. There are some things that I'm purchasing, but it's a little bit more rare, which I just thought was kind of interesting. And in terms of where these books are coming from, if we look at that total number of 175, 32.6% of them are from publishers. So a pretty big chunk of these books are from publishers. 19% are from Amazon, about 15% are from indie bookstores, and about 12% are from Barnes & Noble. So I would like to see the Amazon number continue to drop, but I am pretty pleased because the Amazon number last year I think was a lot higher, and I've been working hard to purchase a lot more from local indie bookstores and from Barnes & Noble. All right, lastly, let's take a look at those author identities. So for the total physical books, about 45% of them are by queer authors, LGBT plus authors, and for the books that I personally purchased, about 44% of them are by queer authors, which is great, honestly. That is a pretty high number, and I think you see that mirrored in how many books I'm reading by queer authors. I've been reading like 40+% by queer authors, and you can see the reason why. The books I'm being sent for review, a lot more of them are by queer authors, and almost half of the books that I'm buying are by queer authors, and that is from a wide variety of different queer identities. Looking overall at the books that have come in this year, about 45% of them are by Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors, which is, you know, pretty good. And then if I look at the books that I've purchased, 54.5% of them are by Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors. I did not look at the sort of Venn diagram of how many of those non-white authors are also queer. I'm sure some of them are, but overall, I should look at that actually. That would be interesting because I'm curious to know. Okay, let me do this because I want to know. The camera overheated, so if the angle looks slightly different, that's why I had to let it cool down. But I was curious, so I went and took a look at all of the books that I've purchased so far this year, and 68% of them are either by Black, Indigenous, or person of color authors or by queer authors. So almost 70% of the books that I'm purchasing are by authors from marginalized groups, which I feel pretty good about because a lot of the rest of those books are books that I'm buying for like read-alongs or different projects that I'm doing. And yeah, that's actually even higher than I was expecting. And again, like I feel good about that because the majority of the money that I am spending on books is going to support authors from marginalized backgrounds, and I think that's great. One other thing that I'll mention in terms of prices, because I did list this out for my digital purchases, so this is ebooks and audiobooks, is that every month but one, my average price per book in terms of audiobooks or ebooks is under $5. So the only exception to that is July, where my average cost per book was $5.18. And my lowest price per book was January at $3.93, but every other month has been like $4 and change, which honestly is pretty good if we're talking about books that I'm getting. So I am getting good deals on the books I'm purchasing in terms of audiobooks and ebooks. It's not like I'm spending a lot per book. The problem is that I'm not reading as many of them as I would like to. So let's like briefly go through the months and see how many digital purchases per month did I read of the things that I bought. So in January, I purchased 14 things. This includes 5 ebooks and 9 audiobooks, and I have read 9 of them, which is actually pretty good. That's one of my better months, probably because it's early in the year. In February, I purchased 23 items. One of them was an ebook, and I have read 16 of them, 16 out of 23. Also, actually not bad. So, which I guess maybe this is part of it, is that I'm planning ahead for things that I know I'm going to read later in the year sometimes. But it doesn't stay good every month. In March, I purchased 16 items and I have read 9 of them. So a little more than half. Not terrible. Some of these are also things where I had Audible credits I was using, where it was get 2 books for 1 credit. I definitely took advantage of those sorts of sales. In April, I purchased 17 digital items and I have read 7 of them. Not great. And I should say most of this is audiobooks. Like I've only bought 10 ebooks this entire year and I have read quite a few of them. In May, I purchased 9 digital items and I have read 4 of them. In June, I purchased 9 digital items and I have read 1 of them. It's like probably my worst month. And then in July, I purchased 18 digital items and I've read 3 of them. So just to kind of give you a sense, now my price per item is fairly low, but again, like I said earlier, I think I am sometimes too quick to jump on a sale because I'm like, ooh, what a good deal on this audiobook. It's like $4. Let me snap it up. But then if I don't have plans to read it anytime soon, it's just sitting there, and is that actually saving money or is it more wasteful? And I think what this is telling me is that I'm not listening to as many of the audiobooks I'm purchasing as I think that I'm going to, and so that's something that I should keep an eye on. The last thing that I wanted to do before I wrap this video up that I just thought would be kind of fun is I wanted to look and see if there were any authors that I was getting books from multiple times. I didn't do this just for the books that I was purchasing. This includes books that were sent to me as gifts or for review, and I didn't separate that out at all. But I wanted to see, okay, like what is the most number of books I've gotten from a single author, and who are the authors that I'm getting more than one book from? And this was interesting. The most books that I got from a single author was 5, and that was Jen Lyons, and that's because Tor very kindly sent me her entire series of books that I am in the process of reading and loving them. They're great. So I have all 5 books in that series. That is definitely the most that I've acquired from a single author. From there, it jumps down to 3 books, and there are 5 authors that I've acquired 3 books from this year. Those authors are Alexis Hall, Katie Robert, Octavia Butler, Robin Hobb, and Sarah J. Maas. And for Sarah, I think part of the reason this number is so high is there's one new book I bought from her, and then I have picked up a couple of cheap paperbacks of books that I've read from her previously for a future project. So that number is high. Robin Hobb, that's not really surprising. I've been doing read-alongs of her books and buying her stuff. And then there are 15 authors that I have acquired 2 books from this year. And I'm going to quickly go through the list in case you're curious, because I do find this kind of interesting. A total of 30 of the books, if you add these all together. Tasha Suri, Shannon McGuire, Rebecca Roanhorse, Ruby Dixon, Nevo, Nettie Okorafor, Olivia Waite, Adriana Herrera, Becky Chambers, Christopher Riocchio, Jay Tulos Hennig, James Baldwin, Joe Abercrombie, Ken Liu, and Lily Sparks. So those are all of the authors that I've acquired 2 physical books from this year. I didn't look at this for the ebooks and audiobooks, although that might be interesting. Maybe at the end of the year I'll do something with that. One other thing that I did write down that in case you're curious, I thought I would let you know. If you're curious how many books I have pre-ordered this year, of those 97 purchases, 18 of them were pre-orders. I have read 10 of them, and I have DNF'd 1 of them. So I have read or DNF'd 61% of my pre-orders, which again isn't bad, but I would like that number to be higher, because pre-orders are books that I am excited enough about that I am buying them before they're even released. And some of them end up just sitting on my bookshelves even though I pre-ordered them, and I'm not getting to them as quickly as I would like to. What did we take away from this? Number one, that it is shameful how much I've been spending on audiobooks and did not even realize. I definitely want to get some of this book spending under control in the second part of the year. You know, some of the money here, I'm not like breaking it out specifically, but some of this is subscription services. I do subscribe to Audible and Libro FM. I've had a Kindle Unlimited subscription, but again, I'm planning on canceling it because I just don't think it's worth it for me, because I don't read a lot of ebooks other than NetGalley arcs mostly. That's like the majority of my ebook reading, and so I just don't think it's worth it personally. And then I have Book of the Month, which I'm considering what I want to do about it. I have mixed feelings. I think I might be more selective in the future with what I get, because some of the books I get from them I love, but I have also had a lot of duds. So I think maybe I need to be a little bit pickier about when I skip months or purchase things. So that's something I'm going to be thinking about. I wanted to be transparent. Hopefully this is interesting for all of you. I like getting deals on stuff, and I like book shopping. And I guess one other thing that I haven't mentioned that I did want to say is that mental health can play a role in this. I know I'm not the only person who deals with anxiety and other mental health things at times, and book buying can be a coping mechanism, and it is certainly something that at times I have used as a coping mechanism, which, you know, is it perfect? Maybe not. Is it a lot healthier than other things that I could be doing? Yes. So I think that that's also a factor that we should talk about when we're having these conversations, is like, where are people at in life? How is mental health playing a role in it? Where, I don't know. I just think this is like a complicated topic that can be very sensitive. I'm curious to hear from all of you in the comments down below. How do you approach your book buying and your budgeting of that? Do you have a budget? Do you track how much you're spending on books? And when I'm talking about these numbers, is it a lot more than what you expected? Is it less than what you expected? I don't know. Like, I'm not really sure what people's perceptions of it are, and I'm curious to hear feedback. I am interested to see how the rest of the year goes. I'm going to continue tracking my purchases, digital and physical, and we'll see how things change. I do think that one thing that has bumped up my numbers quite a bit is that I've contributed to a few Kickstarters this year. So the books that I spent the most on were books for a Kickstarter. There were 4 books and they came out to about $29 a piece, which is more than I've spent on anything else. Can you tell I rarely purchase full price fantasy books because like, oh my God, it's so much money. But yeah, like that's definitely jumped the numbers up. I just recently supported another Kickstarter for some indie authors. And so those books, when they eventually arrive, will be added to my spreadsheet. But at the same time, I like being able to support independent authors. I like being able to support people in the art that they're creating. And if I have the income to be able to do it, I feel like that's a valuable use of my money. So it's complicated and it's messy, and I'm still trying to figure out, like, okay, what do I want that budget to be? I want it to be reasonable and sustainable, but also supporting people who I think are worth supporting. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you approach this. I am very curious. As always, if you like this video, it does help if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.